Now the participants are entering our room.
Mm-hmm. Hello, everybody.
Друзі, вітаю вас.
Привіт. Доброго дня.
І приєднуються.
Ой, добрий вечір.
Сьогодні у нас спікер з Бельгії Марлен Коморowski. І розпочне цю сесію наш бельгійський партнер, якого ви вже добре знаєте, Ален. Він скаже кілька слів про Brussels Creative і про їх основні цілі, методи. А потім передасть сцену для Марлен. So, Alan,
Yep.
can you join us right now?
So, hello everybody, nice to see you back after 1 week of inspiration and exchange that we already covered. I hope that your brain is still fresh, not exploding, and digesting everything we try to bring to you. I'm glad and proud to bring you the second expert from the Brussels, let's say, ecosystem, although Marlen, you will see, she's a cosmopolitan girl because she's operating in different cities in the world. But she was for long based in Brussels, and we did collaborate quite intensively on several projects. If you remember what I told you like a week ago, I was highlighting the fact that Brussels Creative is trying to represent the entire ecosystem and all the stakeholders in Brussels. So not only political institutions or public institutions, the business people, the citizens, but also the academics. And that's the background or where Marlen comes from, the academical world. She still today is connected with the largest Belgian and Brussels university that is called VUB. VUB, together with many different Flemish universities, have also created a huge research center that is called IMEC. Maybe some of you know them, but IMEC is collaborating with ESPO, the Aalto University, is collaborating with most of the universities and research centers all over Europe, very well known in the European Commission because of a very loyal and trustful partner. And she's also connected to the University of Cardiff, Cardiff in Wales, where she also is still connected. And unfortunately, I lost Marlen because she decided to move back to Berlin, to her German like connection. So we lose her more present in Brussels, but she continued to be connected with us and continue to work for our region. She will tell you everything that she was doing and learning about ecosystems the last years in which she has done her, I think her PhD, she will tell it better than me, but also many other papers, white papers, studies, research. And why it is important for me to have academics and research around the table is that it allows also people like the entrepreneurs, the business people, the politicians to sometimes take a bit of distance and try to understand what's going on there and how you can make the best use of some concepts that are starting to pop up in your city or region. So very, very welcome, Marlen. Thanks that you accepted the challenge to, despite the Corona restrictions and the Zoom challenge that we have now, to be with us on the platform. We will give the floor, let's say, the digital floor to you now for the time you want. And like we explained, people will chat, will ask questions. We will observe with Olga what is happening in the chat room, and we will come back to you with questions at the end. In general, there is always nice interaction. Most of them are very vocal, so be ready for the questions after. But I will quit my mic by now so that we all are on mute and you can unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain and Olga. I'm very happy that I can do this lecture today. And thank you for the Edu network of inviting me. So my topic and what I want to talk to you about today is the power of ecosystems, the role of the creative industries to foster innovation in cities and regions. And my name, as Alain introduced myself already, is Marlen Komorowski. And my goal is today, and that's what I was told, to try to inspire you for your projects. And as Alain explained, I come from a research background. So most of the concepts I'm presenting to you today are theoretical research concepts, but I try to apply them as much as possible to the real world. So this way, I hope you will get some good ideas and new approaches you could use in order to go forwards with your projects. A little bit background about myself. So I just finalized my PhD in 2019 at the Freie Universität Brussels, that's the VUB. And I come from a very diverse background. So I studied economics and law, international business studies, and new media and society in Brussels, then as a master before I did my PhD. And I work currently for the Cardiff University, which has a program called Cluster, which funds innovation in the Wales industry, in the creative industries. And I'm also senior researcher at a research center at the VUB called SMIT that studies on media innovation and technology. Additionally, I work sometimes as an independent consultant for policy and for companies in the area of digital innovation. And that's where my focus lies. So I mostly study and analyze media and creative industry related projects, focus on industry clustering, ecosystem and value network analysis, innovation in terms of digitization of firms and industries. And as you can see on the slide, I have a couple of publications. My book was just published by Routledge in May with the title Creative Cluster Development. I'm very happy about. And if you're interested, you can find it online. It's in Google Books. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, because there you will find a lot of my publications and reports online for free for you if you want to continue into the topic I'm presenting to you today. So, the power of ecosystems. I try to make it a little bit more applied and not so academic, because normally I give lectures for master students. And that's why I want to go and give a little bit more of a twist to what I'm presenting to you, to get also for you some direct recommendations. And based on my research experience and what I think you, with coming from the creative industries and doing new projects, could be good advice for you to take on. First, location matters. And I will show you in this presentation what research tells us about the place you're doing your projects, and in how far the place itself can become the making or breaking point in the success of your projects. The second advice I want to give you is join a strong network. So being close to similar-minded people in businesses can create for you strong knowledge flows and interactions that saves you time, money, and create new innovation. And I'm going to go in my presentation more into detail about that. And the third advice I want to give you is become part or build your brand, because the perception of you and your project is often more important than what you actually make. And within the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so, I'm going to give you the concepts that underline these recommendations and in how far you can use these in order to make your projects more successful and become more successful in the creative industries. So what are we talking about when it comes to ecosystems? They are often also called clusters, creative clusters, innovation hubs, networks, or creative city, for example. So there are many different concepts and used also in academia, and they are all similar and slightly different and have different connotations. And how they can be defined was done in 2000 by Michael Porter, who did write a book about especially clusters, and he defined them as a proximate group of interconnected companies and associated institutions in a particular field. linked by commonalities and complementarities. So basically, in short, what we talk about here today are creative activities that agglomerate, meaning being close to each other for mutual advantages. And basically, in a sense that you join the EDU network and that you're participating in these sessions, and hopefully maybe meet after the corona restrictions are being lifted, that this is also an ecosystem in a sense. And an ecosystem can be not only physical, but also digital. So it's all about being connected, interacting, and somehow being close-minded with other people. So the question might be, do ecosystems really matter? So why should you become part of an ecosystem, or why could this actually lead to more success for your projects and ideas? And what has been done in literature is something very interesting, because when the internet came into being, we saw that many researchers and many academics actually felt the opposite now is true. And we don't actually need to be connected in proximity anymore. So Castell wrote in his book, The Rise of the Network Society, that as a network society, you can be actually connected with everyone at all the time through the internet. And this became some concepts that basically said the world is flat and there's a death of distance. So imagine if you, earlier before we had the internet, you would be connected only to the proximity within your city and so on. So this idea of this globalized world of everyone working with everyone all the time is something that was really highlighted. However, we actually see the opposite happening, of that even though we have the internet and you could actually connect with everyone around the world, we still build ecosystems and we still build clusters because we benefit from them. So certain places or ecosystems worldwide exist where innovation and creativity clusters and happens. And it's not just spread all around the world equally. And this is something a lot of academics nowadays call the glocal concept. So from a globalized world, we go to a glocal world where we have certain hubs and hotspots, groups of people where creativity is bundled and where you can find actually most creativity, the most innovative projects, and so on. And to show you a little bit why ecosystems happen and to give it a little bit more background, I have three quite famous examples. The first one, which is one of the most famous creative clusters, that would be Hollywood. And you can find in Hollywood the worldwide strongest agglomeration of film production, of course. So today, 80% of worldwide cinema box office is produced in Hollywood. And you might wonder, why is that the case? Because like I said, the idea could be because we are so globalized and you could work from anywhere, that actually this is not the case anymore and we would need Hollywood anymore. But it's actually still happening all there, and it's very clustered and agglomerized. And why Hollywood is today what it is a very interesting story of how it started. So in the early 1900s, when filmmaking started to take off, Thomas Edison, which you might know from being the inventor of the light bulb as well, actually created and owned a patent for a certain part that was used in a film camera. So he was working and living in New York at that time, where also the movie industry in the US started. And his motion picture patents company was located in New Jersey, and they actually owned a patent in the camera that was used at that time the most. And they heavily enforced the patent payments and sued a lot of movie makers who used the technology, and that was actually not cheap. And you know about Edison, you might have heard couple of stories about Edison being anyways a kind of a dick if it comes to his innovation. So he was always really about the patents and the money if it came to these kind of things. So what happened is that all of the creatives who started making movies in New York felt that's too expensive because of the patent payments they had to do to Edison. And they were basically almost fleeing from one side of the country, so from New York to the very, very other side of the country, which was California. And in this Los Angeles area, they wanted to basically get away from the strict patent rules that they were working under in New York. So because of the patent, they were fleeing from the patent payments they were fleeing from, and additionally the really good weather they had, the weather conditions. So at that time you were shooting most of your movies outdoors, so you were more reliant of having stable, good weather conditions, and what was not the case so much in other areas of the US and also not in New York. So these two combinations were the reason people started going to the LA area. And after a couple of movies which were shot then in that area were really successful, they started to build the first picture studio. And based on this, you have now Hollywood where it is. And this, I find the story really fascinating because it really shows out of a really random reason, or like a very specific reason, like one guy owning a patent. We now have the biggest movie production center in Hollywood, and it's still there, more than 100 years later. So to give you another example, Silicon Valley, and you all know Silicon Valley, which is very famous for innovation, like Google, Netflix, Facebook, they are all located in Silicon Valley. And you might wonder, why is that the case? Why do we have so much innovation in Silicon Valley? And there are many different studies which try to explore this, but one of the starting points, one of the reasons why Silicon Valley grew in this area between San Jose, California, and San Francisco was because of one person at Stanford University who was the dean of the engineering school in the 1940s and 1950s. And he basically started a tradition and really encouraged his students to start their own companies. So after he basically started this tradition, a number of companies came out already back then, and one quite famous is Hewlett-Packard, for example, that was already coming out of Stanford there. So this close proximity of Stanford University and then Silicon Valley there really made this area what it is today. And there were some other factors like the transistor that was invented and manufactured in Silicon Valley gave the area already a leg up in radio and telegraph industry, and other factors like the talent coming out of Stanford University, which could really create this garage mentality of starting new companies, which all make Silicon Valley what it is today. And one of the reasons when you ask companies now why they are located in Silicon Valley is when it comes to startups that you need investment. And if you are looking for investment, you have to be in Silicon Valley in order to find the right people to get investment for your startups. So here again, a completely different reason, but still worldwide innovation and where innovation and creativity is happening is defined by this. And I also wanted to give you an example from Europe. So I chose Berlin. Berlin is, especially in Europe, very, very famous for being a location for artists. And it's a very creative city. And one of the reasons why this is because Berlin was a couple of years ago really one of the cheapest places to live in or rent studio space. Compared to other big cities in Europe, Berlin was by far the cheapest. And it's still today fairly cheap if you compare it to London or Paris, for example. I myself lived in Berlin 10 years ago, where I had an apartment for 500 euros back then with 3 rooms. Today I pay more than double for this, and I couldn't find a cheaper one. But it's still, compared to other big cities, a fairly cheap one. And this is what really attracted artists, and it created this kind of artistic environment that then again attracted more artists. And this is a theory defined by Florida, who really said it's like a spiral of creative people being at a place, which attracts companies who need to hire creative people in order to do their products, because they do more, create more jobs in that place. They attract, again, more creatives into the city. And this is a spiral where city becomes more and more creative. And Berlin is such a case, in my opinion. And it's really interesting to see how there is so much happening in one place here. So these ecosystems are all well known: Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and Berlin. but there are many different factors of why they are what they are and how these ecosystems function. And I want to explain you a little bit better, combining this with the recommendations. I wanted to give you the concepts that lie behind it in theory and in academia, and I hope that they are useful for you. So, like I mentioned, my first recommendation for you is choose the right location. And in theory and in concepts, one of the very reasons discussed is why are cities so successful? Why are certain regions and cities so successful? And one major reason for that is something that is described in academia as urbanization economies. So urbanization economies is an academic term that is used to describe various dynamics that are happening in cities specifically. And this doesn't mean that rural places or the countryside are not the right choice for you to go with your projects. It depends all on different reasons, but I want to focus here really on these urban scales and the scope of cities that really bring benefits for creative industries and creative activities. And as you see in this slide, one of the reasons why creativity and new services and new products and new ideas are being developed in cities is that if you're in a city, you have a high density of people, and this gives access to future customers, users, and audiences. So if you have a business, if you're an entrepreneur, and you want to find the biggest size of users, the best shot is for you to go to a city. And this graphic a little bit explains what has happened over the last years and what is still happening towards the future, that now more people live in cities than in rural areas, and this already since the 2000s. And that's a trend, this urbanization trend, that a lot of academics predict to continue. So more people who will live in city, less people who will live on the countryside. And that's why a lot of activities also cluster in urban areas. Another reason, if it comes to especially innovation and digitization, why cities are so attractive and why a city is a good choice to bring in a new innovation or to do a project, is that the digital technologies are much higher adopted in cities than in rural areas. So in this graphic, you see the higher bar is the percentage of US adults adopting home broadband, smartphones, who own a tablet or who own a desktop or laptop computer, and the lower is the percentages of rural adults. So if you can reach 73% of the population or 63%, can make a huge difference for your ideas and for your projects and so on. And another reason also to look in the future at cities and why cities are these places of creativity and innovation is that with the 5G technology that is going to come up, and I know in Germany they started the first tests. In Brussels you already have some 5G towers, but this will be a purely urban project. So I gave you a quote from the T-Mobile Chief Technology Officer, who wrote in April 2019, 5G will never materially scale beyond small pockets of 5G hotspots in dense urban environments. So if you're thinking about a project which might need 5G technology, you cannot do it at every place, but you need to find the right place in order to do it. And one of the reasons 5G will not come to every place is that the towers that transmit 5G mobile technology have a much smaller reach than 4G, actually. They are smaller, so they are more easily to build up in certain areas, but the reach is much smaller. So you would need almost 10 times as many 5G towers as 4G towers to cover the same areas. And that's why it's predicted that it's actually not going to happen outside of very dense populated areas. And another reason why cities, but this can also be the case for certain rural areas, is something that is very attractive, or is the place for creativity to flourish and innovation to happen, is the complexity of urban spaces. So what we see now, that the scale of cities, and the bigger they become and the more densely populated become, the more heterogeneous they become. And this creates a very complex world with diverse social roles in the city. You have different working and living environments that are close interconnected, especially now during Corona times. You will see that this creates a lot of space where you could innovate in, of people working and living at home. Also issues of spatial division, that it's sometimes very difficult to reach one spot from the other because of congestions and traffic, complex transportation in infrastructures, and localized production systems throughout the system. So you imagine you have a new service or a product that goes for all of these complexities. So there needs to be a lot of problem solution that needs to happen there. And this also creates a lot of creativity and innovation, because you have all of these challenges in cities, and this also creates solutions and new innovation and creativity. So this regarding of, if you do your projects, you need to choose the right location for it. And there are many different reasons and concepts why you might choose a city or a different place, or which city you would choose. But the second advice I want to give you is about networks. And the idea here is that you need to build networks, create networks, and engage with networks in order to be creative and successful. So networks matter because of a different academic concept that's called agglomeration economies. So the first one was all about urbanization economies, and now the second one is all about agglomeration economies. And one academic, Williams, already in 1985 states that firms exist mainly because they economize on costs. And there is something that I would like to talk about that's called transaction cost theory, that really nicely explains why networks are really important. So the idea is that if you join a network, and if you're part of a network and an ecosystem, that you can really save a lot of costs that you might otherwise have to face. And firms and services located in a certain place or in a common ecosystem might benefit from cost savings because of, for example, transportation costs. So this theory really comes from more of a manufacturing side idea of, imagine you're a car manufacturer and you have suppliers who deliver you your tires or parts of your car. If you are located right next to each other, bringing one product in order to finalize your car to yourself will be much cheaper as if you have to ship it from China, for example. So that's why you see in car manufacturing really hotspots in Germany. That's, for example, Wolfsburg, where you have Volkswagen, and around this, you really see that all of the different manufacturers of car parts are all located in this area in Germany. And one of the biggest reasons is because of these cost savings. So not only do you have transportation costs, but you might also have transaction costs, which is something that can be explained by different things. So a transaction can be anything from us now having this time to chat, or later the questions, which costs us time, or you might want to do a contract with a different company or with a supplier or with a freelancer. And if you have, for example, 2 different languages, you might have higher costs in order to make this contract because you need translation. Or if you want to meet someone, you need to fly to that place. So there are lots of different ways where you have transaction costs, not only transportation costs, and these are reduced if you're in the same ecosystem. Search and information costs is something very important. So if you have a project and you're looking for someone who can do the design, or you need someone to do a website, if you are already in an ecosystem, in a network, where you know people who know people, you will find the right person quite easily. If you're outside of this, you have higher costs because you have more uncertainties. And if you're looking for someone who can supply things for you, it might take you more time and so on. Bargaining costs are very much related to transaction costs. So if you are trying to make a contract with someone, if you're joining the same ecosystem and you already have some bargaining concepts established, it's much more faster to find an agreement to do the contract. If you're outside of the same network and ecosystem, it can take much more time and effort. And other cost areas are policing and enforcement costs or hiring costs. I want to go a little bit more detail into hiring costs because that's interesting really in terms of also the place where you might choose to do your project, because if you're in a place where you have a lot of talent, a little bit like Silicon Valley, where it's very easy to find engineers, to find programmers and so on, you will be able to like tip in a pool of talented people who are having the right skills, who can do the right thing very easily if you're already in a network where they are as well. If you're outside of this network, it's much more difficult to find this labor pool and find the right people. So in this graphic, you see it's based on transaction cost theory between two companies. You see there are different factors coming into place, like institutions and these transaction costs between them and internal actions, transaction costs. And the idea in a theory is really that you will be able to save a lot of these costs if you're a part of a network. Another important point about networks and why you should join them is not only because it might save you money and it might save you costs and time, but also the idea of knowledge flows and spillovers, which are also part of this concept of agglomeration economies. So if you're joining a network, the idea here really is that you will create a kind of information flow through different kind of knowledge that exists already in the network, and that these knowledge flows tend to be geographically localized or within a certain ecosystem. So if you create your own network with edu or with other similar-minded people, you automatically create these kind of spillover effects that are needed in order to be more creative and more innovative. And what you see here in this graphic is the concepts of different kind of knowledge and different kind of knowledge exchange that are happening. You don't need to know all of them, but what I found interesting is that there are knowledge that you need to be creative and innovative that is codified and non-codified explicit knowledge. And the non-codified knowledge is something that is not possible to basically write down or teach someone, but this is more patterns of behavior, of knowing how to interact with other people. It has quite often something to do with reading other people. And you might have already experienced that when you talk to someone who is, for example, like a biologist, he has a very different understanding of how to communicate knowledge or what he knows than you might as a designer or someone from technology. So there are certain patterns that are not so easy to transfer. And if you're joining a network of similar-minded people, you get to know these little behavioral ways of doing things just by joining the network and interacting with these people. So that's the non-codified explicit knowledge. And then you might have codified knowledge that you didn't know before. And by joining a network, you might, someone tells you, you should check out this website. It explains perfectly how to use this in this software, for example. So there are different ways of what knowledge is, and then there are different ways of transferring it. And these are the big two circles in this graphic in the middle. So knowledge transfer can happen intentionally and it can happen unintentionally. And intentionally really means maybe you joined a network like here and now you're sitting in this lecture. So this is codified knowledge, which you will be able to see later on the slides if you want to download them. And it was intentional because you're here in order to learn something. But networks are not only about this really direct intentional transfer of knowledge, but they can also be about unintentional spillovers. So if you go and meet friends who are doing similar projects or do have a similar kind of mindset, or also creative people, or work in technology, and you go for a coffee and you tell someone about the project and how it's going, he might actually learn something from it, even though you didn't intentionally want them to learn something, or you just wanted to talk about it. So this is really something important if it comes to network and ecosystems, because the idea is not only that you need these ecosystems to take part in courses or to ask people for help, but it's also about this unintentional knowledge exchange. It's this kind of buzz where you talk with other people, where you just learn by interacting. The more you interact, the idea really is the more you will learn. And what I also found interesting is if it comes to these kind of ecosystems, that you might go from one project to the next and you always take knowledge with you. So even though maybe one project might not be successful, but by having done it, you can take over all the experience you've made into the next project with your ecosystem, with other people, learn something new. And the idea here is that overall an ecosystem has higher knowledge than if you would be all individuals. Another point I want to make about networks is something that is very economic, but I find it really interesting, is the idea of network effects. And this is something that comes much more from digital service research. So people wanted to understand why certain digital projects are so successful as they are. And that's how basically this network effects were later described. And if it comes to network effects, you can have them not only in the digital world, but you can also have them in the real world. And it's something that I think might be really interesting for you to know and understand. So there are so-called direct network effects, and direct networks effects are there when you have joined a network, and with each person, with each additional user or person that joins this network, you create more value. And this, the best example of what to use this for is, imagine you have the telephone, which is a really nice service to have, but if no one else has a telephone or has a telephone connection, this is actually useless to you. If one other person has a telephone, oh, you can call one other person. So that's a value of 1. If if 3 people have the telephone, it's not only that you can call 2 people, but these people can again call the other 2, which means there is an incremental increase in value of the network. So the more people are in the network, the more value the network itself has. So that's the direct network effect theory. And what also exists are indirect network effects that are more on a platform with more than one side. And this could be, for example, the case for something like Amazon. You're not actually benefiting from other people purchasing their goods on Amazon, but you would benefit from more people offering their goods on Amazon. And if it comes to these kind of platforms and networks where you have 2 sides, you have on the one side the people who want to sell stuff, and you have on the other side the people who want to buy stuff, you have indirect network effects, because on the one hand, the people who want to sell stuff benefit from the more people want to buy stuff on this platform, and you benefit on the other side from more people wanting to sell stuff on the platform, but you don't necessarily benefit from more sellers when you are a seller, or from more buyers when you're a buyer. And what is interesting here is that if you have these kind of ideas and products and services that require a lot of people to use it on one side or two sides, that you have quite often a chicken and egg problem. Because if you're Amazon and you want to convince people to sell their products on their platform, you need to tell them, yes, you should sell it because we have 100 people who would buy it. But on the other side, how do you convince 100 people to come to your website to buy stuff if you don't have yet the people who are selling stuff? So there's a chicken and egg problem of how to get these kind of services out. And you can have even more complicated services like this, where you have a combination of direct and indirect network effects. And one example would be Facebook, or another would be LinkedIn, where you on the one hand benefit from more people joining Facebook, because you could connect with more people and more friends. And on the other side, you have advertisers who would benefit from more users. So there you have like a dynamic that creates even more value increase over the time. And if it comes to theory, there has been a lot of discussions where it was talked about that these network effects actually mean that there will be always a monopoly, because as soon as you have this critical mass of people like Facebook, that this cannot be broken out anymore, because you could not move to a different platform because all of your other friends would not at the same time move to this other platform. And what we've seen now in reality is that this is not the case, and that people are much more easy to switch from one service to another if it's possible. So having other services out there can actually, when especially trust is lost, it could happen that the whole population of people might migrate to a different service. And while this comes really from a business perspective, I thought that's interesting on the one hand, if you're thinking about a project or an innovation in the context where you have a lot of users and interaction and social interaction. But I also thought that this is important for you if you create a network, because you might join an ecosystem or a network like Edu, where you now have the experts on the one side, and you are the people who are participating in this project, and you benefit on the one hand of having a lot of people also joining because you can exchange ideas, and on the other hand you also benefit from the experts and good experts joining. And of course, if it comes to these things, what I also want to highlight is that sometimes the value is not always increasing continuously, but it might flatten, or even after some breaking point you might think, oh, I don't want more people to join this class, because if now we are 33 people in this session, but if you might be 100 people, it's much more difficult to ask questions then in the end. So there are a lot of effects that come into place, and it's important to think about the size and how far people benefit from more people or less people, and to take this into consideration when you build and create your own network. And I want to come now to my last advice, where I want to advise you to build and create your own brand. Because what I found in my research, and what is supported also by other academics, is that quite often what you're doing is sometimes even less important than how you brand yourself and how you're perceived. And to exemplify this, comes again to cities, and the idea and the concept behind is something I developed myself that's called perception economies. So I talked about urbanization economies, why the place matters, agglomeration economies, why the connection and the network matters, and now the perception economies. So why for economic reasons and for being successful with your projects and with your own ideas, the perception is something very important. And there is this idea that basically you brand yourself and you can become something that surrounds, that creates an image of you that is sometimes even more important than what you actually can do or what you do. So I give here 3 pictures of 3 different cities, because I just moved to Berlin upper corner is a picture from Berlin. Then we have Vienna and we have Paris. And I think if you hear these three city names, and I might tell you, I'm a designer from Berlin, I'm a designer from Vienna, or I'm a designer from Paris, you might have completely different ideas about what kind of designer I am, or how successful I would be as a designer, and so on. And I give you another example. Imagine you want to hire someone to do your website, and you have a web developer who is sitting in Paris, and you have a web developer that is sitting in Wanne-Eickel. That's a very small town in Germany. And you just hear these two differences, and you don't know anything else about this web developer, and you might not have seen any examples of what he can do, but just know that one is from Wanne-Eickel and one is from Paris. Who would you choose? And that's what I mean with sometimes how you're perceived is even more important than what you can do. And how you're perceived can come from the place you're living, you're working in. It can come from the city you're working in. It can come from the office you're working in. And what I want to highlight, it can also come from the people that you surround yourself. So if you're part of a network like Edu, and Edu has a certain brand and image and is perceived as something very prestigious to take part in, people will also perceive you and your services and products as something more valuable in the end. And this can also happen from how you might even dress yourself, and with what kind of acquaintances you have, and what kind of people you hang out with, and what kind of people you work with together. So there are really, really many factors that come into place of how you're perceived. And this perception creates value for you, even though the actual value of the project or idea or product or service that you want to do is very high or very low. But the perception is something that is so important that this creates the actual value of your idea. So that's something I really wanted to highlight as well. And this brings me almost to the end of my presentation. And like I tried to highlight, there are really three things I want to give you on your way to working continuously on your projects and to go into the next lectures from Edu and so on. Is if you want to be successful with your projects, really the location is something very, very important, where creativity clusters and where innovation and creativity happens at certain places, and these are not random. So choose to be part of a location and a place that really brings out the strength of your project. The second is join or create a strong network, because the network you're joining can create value for yourself. It can create cost savings. It can create knowledge spillovers, intentionally, like we are doing right now in this lecture, or unintentionally. So you might just benefit from talking to more and more people. And the third point I want to make is become part of or build your own brand, because the brand and how you're perceived with your ideas and with your project is something that is really one of the most important ways of going forward. Because if you're doing the best project and the best idea ever, but it's from outside perceived as something very bad, it will always lose. So thank you very much. So I think I talked now for almost 40 minutes. I hope that was not too long, and that you could take some of the points and concepts I was making as into your projects. And we will share this presentation, as I understood, for you, so you can access it later as well. You can Google all of the concepts, because I know I talk a lot about very scientific ideas and concepts that are not so easily applicable for every project, but I hope this could inspire you as well. And I'm also going to share some of my freely accessible research for you if you want to read something, which also will be on the platform from Edu, freely accessible for you. So
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marlen. Very beautiful. Nice to. It was a long time ago that I didn't hear all the developments and the research you did. So nice to have a fresh update thanks to Edu. And it's very close, like I told you, to my personal belief as well, that these regions and cities are real, like a vibrant kind of ground, or a fertile ground for innovation and creativity. And we should try, of course, in each region to build something strong, but also like to see how we can interconnect. One of the challenges of a program like Edu now is to see how we can connect throughout the borders, Espoo, Kiev and Brussels. So that's also an additional layer that is quite nice to try to see if creative ecosystems from different regions can interconnect and also create spillovers and exchange of knowledge, etc., and acceleration. So very nice. I will ask to Olga if you can see. I've seen in the chat that there were some questions, but Olga, please take over like you did the other days.
Yes, yes, my friends.
Shoot toward Marlen.
Yes, I see that Vladimir has 2 questions to Marlen. And if Vladimir is still with us, so I ask him to read these questions.
Here. Evening, everybody. Marlen, thanks for the lecture, and I have 2 questions for you. I think you are familiar with anthropological research in your work, and my first question to you is, what do you think on why very accessible industry 4.0 technologies, as the 3D printing, for example, are still so underused in comparison with digital-only technologies?
So if it comes to 3D printing and something like what I see as well with VR, for example, is the difference between that you have this initial investment of having to buy the 3D printer, of having to buy the VR technology in order to then develop on top of this your new service idea or your new project, is still a big difference if it comes to the digital-only technologies and platforms, especially now, which are still, it's really a trend. Everything has to be a platform at the moment. And one of the ways to overcome this, and I think you will have this also, we have this in Brussels, I know there are these maker workshops where all of these kind of 4.0 technologies are freely available for creatives and individuals to use. So this is something that a lot of people don't know about. And these workshops, I think, are a really good way of trying out these new technologies and going into the next phase. Of course, you have also other hot topics like blockchain, for example. That's something that came up and that almost disappeared again because people started realizing it's not so applicable as they thought it was. But if it comes to 3D printing, I think it's the accessibility. And one way to overcome this is to look in your city. If you find a workshop like a makerspace, some of the co-shared offices have sometimes this kind of technology which you can just rent for an hour to overcome this. But a lot of people don't know where to access it, and just doing the digital only of going online and programming something is still much more easy than finding and getting access to these other technologies nowadays. That's my opinion. But if you're interested in this, I really recommend to look for these maker spaces, because when I talk to people and they're always, oh, I would have loved to try 3D printing. And I said, yes, you can. In Brussels, you just go to this makerspace. It's for free and you can try out whatever you want. And a lot of people don't know it. And I think that's at the moment the reason here.
Thank you for the answer. So basically, it's interesting shift between anthropological, more common production with the digital production. Thank you for that. So, and I have another one for you. Don't you think that perception economies applied with consumerism trend is a far greater problem than even ecological problems and trends? So in my opinion, perception economies is deliberately guilty of spawning most of disinformation and fake news problems and building fake brands of people and companies that can easily be born, produced, destroyed, and then all the fraud you can just repeat.
So the idea of perception economies really came from my research trying to advise cities of how to become more creative. And if you see it from that dynamic, why I developed it is that I wanted to give them concepts of how to attract more creative people to their places. And then it's not so much of a societal problem or a societal idea of how to handle things. It's more of how can I make my city more attractive, and perception economies is the concept underlying it that advises cities to work on their marketing, make their cities more sexy in a sense, or more or different. So combining it with consumerism, I see a little bit what you mean here of this work around of that things are perceived, but it's not the real thing. But if, in my opinion, and I come from a philosophical perspective of perception is everything, because nothing is, we all perceive something in a different way, and we don't have, in a sense, so much of a shared perception of things, because for me, one thing could be really soft metros, and for you it would be really hard metros, because we're used to something different. So if you come from this very basic philosophical perspective, perception is nothing bad per se. Of course, you can come from a more perspective of this is the truth and this is the perception, and the perception is different from the truth. Well, that's something to discuss. And I also analyze disinformation. I have a couple of research projects where I now, for example, looked at Twitter and how the spread of fake news about COVID-19 on Twitter is happening. And if it comes to these kind of almost bubbles of information that basically misinformed people and that form more extremist views in our society, I think it's a huge problem. But I see it at the moment from a more like management business perspective of you trying to advise you to keep perception as something that is very important for you to take on board when you do your projects. From a societal perspective, yes, I agree. Could be a problem. I hope that answered the question a little bit.
Yes, you perfectly answered my question, and my conclusion that perception economies is can do many good things, but when it applies to big entities that can be observable. Exactly. So that's my summary. Thank you very much. Thank you for answers.
Okay, friends, and we have some more questions. Oля Gusarova, I see your question. Are you still with us? Olga Gusarova? No, she isn't here, but...
Yeah, I'm here, and I wanted to ask if the pandemic will influence on those schemes. Will it could it increase the influence of ecosystems on creativity? Do we need to change the ecosystems somehow in order to make them more fitable to situation?
Mm-hmm. I believe that where I came from was really this idea of saying digital is not enough, and we need the physical as well. We need to meet as well, and we need to mingle as well. And that's what my research told me. And you need to go with people face to face and go out and drink a coffee. I actually believe now, after Corona, that so more people adopted technologies like Zoom, like we are here in right now, and that you can have similar quality exchanges and create similar networks also online than you can in the physical world. And this actually, the Corona situation changed my view on this, because before that I really was always going, also in my PhD, of saying the quality of the exchanges and the ecosystems, if they are physical, is much higher than if they are purely digital. And after this couple of months of going into a lot of different workshops, of having to handle my day-to-day work with my colleagues via Teams, for example, or all of these other software, I think I might have to change my view a little bit on it. And also policymakers should change their view on it. And I think this digital, if you can create a good quality, and if you have people all on board with it, and that's what Corona did for us, because we were forced to do this digital also in a high quality, that this way of looking at ecosystems and ecosystems not being this physical thing anymore could now have come to be because of Corona. What this will be in the long term is something we have to see, because this could be a momentary moment of ecosystems all having to move online, and after all the restrictions are gone, maybe this is gonna change completely back. We don't know. Or maybe some parts of it will stay and we can have quality exchange and we can create qualitative good ecosystem also digitally, or maybe not. That's something to see in the future, and I'm looking forward to see how this is gonna develop in the next couple of months. But it's a really interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer.
Okay, guys, and we have also a question from Alina Kostikova. Alina, can you read it?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well. Go on.
I have kind of personal question, and I want to ask, could we have some more network with you later? Because I have the project that is exactly about building the ecosystem, but I don't have a particular question for you right now. I just want to show my project and ask, is it like, can it came to life, or just maybe you can give me some advice? And I just want to ask if it is possible.
Yes, of course, Alina. Like I mentioned in the beginning, on the slide set, you will see my email address. That's actually my private email address. And you also have my LinkedIn profile link. So feel free to just connect with me, everyone who's interested, to keep the conversation going on LinkedIn, or send me an email, and I'm happy to set up a couple of calls with everyone, and you can present me what you are working on, and I'm happy to share my thoughts on it.
Thank you a lot. So we will stay in touch, I hope.
Great.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And we have one more question direct now. Dasha?
Hello. Yeah, I have a question. What do you think is the most efficient way to develop network? Because as I understood, you lived in different countries. Maybe you have, you can share your experience. Does it depend on a specific location? Thank you.
So in my experience, and also I would say supported by the research I've been doing, it depends on two things. On actually the location and on the people you already know. And I work now in, I have worked in Brussels for 7 years. And for me, leaving Brussels actually made a huge loss of my network in Brussels, because like Alain mentioned, that I'm not there anymore, and not being able to go to the events there where I regularly met the same people. I'm a part of some organizations there that I worked with, and these were always the people that I worked on the projects as well. So having this mixture of work-related network, but also people you see a lot in your free time and at after-work events and these kind of things, was really location dependent. And now that I am in Berlin and I'm still working for Brussels and Cardiff, means for me, I need to start from scratch here. And I really see a difference of not me having the same network here. I don't know much people here. And I just moved in May to this city, so I'm at the beginning. But for me, what I'm trying to do now here in Berlin is to just really reach out to people. I'm sending people from universities emails, just asking them about the projects they are doing when I see that there is a lot of overlap, and meeting with people for coffee, because a lot of people are quite open to just, oh, you're also a designer, you're also working on this kind of project, oh, let's meet up for a coffee next week. And that's happening quite a lot. And in Berlin, you're actually allowed to do that at the moment, even though, because there's no Corona restrictions. And this is what I'm actually really working hard on right now. I'm writing at least 3 people per week, which I think could be interesting to have in my new network. And that's what I'm effectively doing. So there's a huge dependence on the location. And the second thing is people you already know. And one of the best examples is now why am I talking to all of you, because I know Alain. And Alain had the connection already to Edu, and now I'm here getting into your network, basically. So there are these 2 ways of also letting people you already know, make them also aware that you're open to join other networks and go beyond your network, and that you're happy to help out with things. And the other thing is really work on the place you're already in, because that's something very important. And like I said, I think maybe we have to rethink the physical location a little bit now after Corona, but at the moment I still see how important it is. And that's also how I advise you to work on your network, to go for the city you're in or the region you're in, and then go through the people you already know to get into new networks, maybe also outside of the region and city you're in, to build up more connections as much as possible. And qualitative high connections is also important.
Okay. I see one more question. Vladimir is trying to keep you.
No problem.
Vladimir, join.
Yeah, thank you again. And have a question, Marlen. Can you recommend some research or complete white papers on the topic of knowledge distribution in the different types of networks you mentioned?
I have a couple of links. I was just thinking maybe I'm gonna add to the end of the slide set just a couple of links where you can click on about all the different topics that I've talked about, so you can read further into some of the areas. So there is quite some interesting research there. One of the things there's a paper which I really like, because a lot of people think if you have an innovative idea and you have an idea to do something really cool and new, you should not tell anybody, because they could steal it, or someone else could be faster than you, and then you lose your moment. And I think quite a few may think about this as well at the moment. And there's a research paper that actually proves that this is completely wrong. And if you have an innovative idea, you should tell everyone you know. The more people you tell about the idea, the better. So maybe this is helpful for some of you, and I will share it as well then in the slide set.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Friends, some more questions? No? Okay, then the last one from me, maybe. Marlen, do you have your favorite creative ecosystem in the world, and why?
Good question. So I have to say it's Berlin, to be honest. It was also one of the reasons why I moved back to Berlin. This city here is really amazing, and I can recommend everyone to come here and check it out, because you have this complexity I talked about is really core of this city. You have weird people, different people. It's an ecosystem. It's also like an island in itself, which I find interesting, because of this, Berlin is surrounded by Brandenburg, and in Brandenburg is nothing. So you basically have to drive 2 hours in every direction in order to find the next bigger city. So it's this island of weird random people doing crazy things and thinking crazy things, and I find this very, very fascinating. And of course I miss Brussels as well, which was also a really, really interesting ecosystem with a lot of different people. And what I also like about Brussels, people say it's Petit Paris, and that's actually what it is, because Paris is big and massive, and you have a certain idea about what Paris is. And if you get sick of it, you come to Brussels, because you have all the benefits from Paris, but not all of the negative things about it. And it's still an ecosystem that is overviewable, because cities can also be too big, and then it's really easy to get lost in it. And this just speaking from my experiences of where I have lived, and what I want to check out a little bit more what is happening in Asia in the coming next years, because I think there is a lot happening as well of ecosystem development. So I hope to be able to research a little bit more other areas than Europe, because right now my focus is on Europe.
Okay, greatly. Thank you. Thank you so much. So now I want to visit Berlin. Oh, yes, it's from Alan.
I want to thank everybody, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you also.
And we will indeed, like Marlen was proposing, we will share tomorrow via Olga to you the slides of Marlen and maybe some additional links. But I hope the second originally Brussels-based experts inspired you. And soon we will come back with the third person to continue to inspire the different regions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, and I hope to see you once again.
Thank you
maybe
very much.
In Berlin, in Brussels.
Yeah. Thank you, Marlen. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.